Hare Krishna everybody, Dandavat Pranam. As I had said in my previous video, I will try to encapsulate the entire Bhagavad Gita very briefly in as short a time as possible. So here's my attempt. So it is said that Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita in around 45 minutes, and I saw a video on YouTube by His Grace Dr. Keshav Anand Prabhu, who had summarized the entire Bhagavad Gita in just 45 minutes. And I was inspired by that, and this is my attempt to do that. So thank you, Dr. Keshav Anand Prabhu, for your very inspiring video. So Bhagavad Gita. Firstly, the introduction. If you see the ISKCON's Bhagavad Gita, the introduction is pretty lengthy, and I find it very powerful. Srila Prabhupada has really summarized the entire the mission of ISKCON, what ISKCON stands for. He has summarized what is Bhakti Yoga, and of course what is Bhagavad Gita all about. So do read the introduction. Some people do skip it, and some people even skip the first chapter because they feel that it's just a description of the war, and the actual Bhagavad Gita starts from the second chapter. But no, the first chapter is equally important. So Bhagavad Gita has got 18 chapters, as you all know, and think about these 18 chapters as 18 steps which will take you to your final destination. And what is the final destination? The final destination is love of God. Yes, love of Lord Krishna, that is our final destination. Some people who are in ISKCON also believe that our final destination is go to the Golok Dham, but actually that is not our final destination. Our first final destination is to lovingly serve Lord Krishna, loving devotional service. The place doesn't really matter, whether you're in Golok Dham or whether you're here on the earth planet. That is not so important. But what is important is that you get opportunities to serve the Lord. You get opportunities to serve other devotees, other Vaishnavas. So loving devotional service is a key word. So as I said, there are 18 steps to that final goal. And it begins with the introduction, Bhagavad Gita, and then the first chapter. The first chapter, Prabhupada has titled as Observing the Armies. In one of my previous videos, I had summarized the first chapter, but this is a quick trailer of the first chapter. So first chapter has got, yes, it has got a description of the armies, but it's not just that. Bhagavad Gita begins with the king Dhritarashtra asking his secretary Sanjay as to what is happening in the battlefield. He's sitting in the palace, he cannot see, and his secretary Sanjaya, who is equipped with divine vision, Divya Drishti, so he can sit in the palace and can see the entire Bhagavad Gita and he can narrate it like a commentary. So Sanjay goes on to describe. The first chapter has got verses of Sanjay, and also the last chapter has got some verses, and in between also here and there. But yes, the first chapter has got a number of verses by Sanjay. So Sanjay goes on to describe the first chapter. He says, by the way, when Lord Krishna was speaking Bhagavad Gita, there was no chapters. He didn't say, okay Arjuna, now if you finish the second chapter and we move on to third chapter. No, it was just one continuous flow of verses. And it is for our convenience that we have divided into sections. where the main topic of this section is this, and then the other section, the chapters are for our sake, and also the title of the chapter, which summarizes the chapter. So the first chapter begins with Dhritarashtra's question, Dharmakshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsava Mamaka Pandavaschaiva Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. And Sanjaya says that the prince Duryodhana, actually Sanjay addresses Duryodhana as king. Raja Vachanam Abravit. So Duryodhana is not yet the king, but he is addressed as a king. One reason is because Duryodhana is already displaying the diplomacy that the kings display. He was a good administrator and diplomat. And number two, Dhritarashtra obviously wanted Duryodhana to be the future king. So maybe in a way trying to please his master, he has addressed Duryodhana as King Duryodhana. So Duryodhana goes to his teacher and briefs him just before the beginning of the war, briefs him about all the main people on the other side and how the army is arranged and what are the priorities to protect Bhishma, who is the main warrior on the side of Kauravas, because Bhishma, their entire confidence is placed on Bhishma Dev. So we need to ensure that Pitama Bhishma is adequately protected and so on. And then grandfather Bhishma blows his conch shell, and then everybody else starts blowing the conch shells. The conch shells of the main warriors on the side of Pandavas are mentioned, beginning with Lord Krishna, whose conch shell is described as transcendental, Divya Shankar. So Vyasadeva, Srila Vyasadeva is already giving us indications that this battle will be heavy for Kauravas, because all good signs of victories are coming from the Pandava side, obviously because Lord Krishna is on the side of Pandavas. And the conch shell starts blowing, and then what happens is Arjuna, who is the principal warrior on the side of Pandavas and whose chariot driver is Lord Sri Krishna, tells his chariot driver, please take my chariot in the midst of both the armies, because I want to see who all have come here. And therefore Lord Krishna places the chariot in the middle. Arjuna sees everybody present there, and Arjuna gets a shock. Though he was a very seasoned warrior, this war was different, and he saw all his relatives assembled there, all his favorite people, and Arjuna starts sweating and shaking and shivering, and he gets overwhelmed by emotions, and he says, I cannot fight this war because all these people are my own families, and why am I fighting this war? For what? For just a kingdom? Oh, even for the 3 worlds, I'm not going to kill these people. And Arjuna goes on to give 4 reasons why he doesn't want to fight. One reason is his general compassion for people, because he's a Vaishnava, he's got a very pure heart, and a Vaishnava feels compassion for every living entity. So first reason is compassion. Second reason is that Arjuna fears that all the family traditions will be destroyed if we kill all the men folk in the family traditions will be lost, and therefore the women of the family will be left unprotected, and that will cause the downfall of the women. And then the third reason Arjuna gives is that if we kill our own family members, that is a sin. You know, the Shastras say that, Dharma Shastra says that killing one's own family members is a sin. And then finally Arjuna says, see, if I win the kingdom, how can I enjoy? Because all the people for whom I want to fight this war, I want to win this kingdom, to share with my relatives and friends and to show off to my friends and relatives, they will all be dead. What will I do with all this kingdom? There will not be any happiness. So that's the other reason. And by the end of the first chapter, Arjuna puts down his bow and arrow, and he says, Govinda, I shall not fight. So that ends the first chapter. And we find that Arjuna is thoroughly depressed. He's in no mood to fight. He refused to fight, and that's the end of the first chapter. But Govinda, he's a lord of senses. He's Rishikesha. He is the controller of our senses and mind. He knows how exactly to get Arjuna out of this depression. So the second chapter, which is titled as Contents of the Gita Summarized, we find for the first time that Lord Krishna starts speaking, but not until the 11th verse. So first 10 verses are a continuation of Arjuna's monologue. So Arjuna gives various reasons why he thinks it's not a good idea to fight, and then he admits that I'm confused. Though Arjuna gives reasons why he decided not to fight, yet that decision was not final, because Arjuna says, Govinda, I'm confused. I don't know whether winning this battle is a good idea or losing the battle is a good idea, because I don't know whether capturing them is a good idea or being captured by them is a good idea. You see, that was a strange statement. So a warrior goes into the battle, has to be clear-headed. His aim is to capture or kill the enemy. That's it. But here Arjuna was confused, and he admits it. He doesn't cover it up. He admits it. Govinda, I'm confused. And then Arjuna says that, and that's the turning point of the story so far. Arjuna says, Govinda, I don't know what is right for me, what is the right action now. I'm confused. You please help me. Govinda, hey Krishna, I surrender unto you. I am your disciple. I'm a soul surrendered to you. Please help me. Please guide me. And Shishyasteham Shadimam Tvam Prapannam. I take your shelter. So when Arjuna says that he has surrendered to Lord Krishna, that is when Lord Krishna takes the position of Arjuna's guru, and he goes on to speak Bhagavad Gita. It's interesting to note here that Lord Krishna is changing his position quickly. In the beginning, Arjuna and Krishna were on the same level. They were friends. And before the war began, Krishna took a lower position. He became Arjuna's servant. He was a chariot driver. Now, Arjuna makes Krishna his guru, and Krishna takes a higher position. So Krishna is changing his gears. He is a Bhakta Vatsala. Whatever it takes to make my devotee happy, or whatever it takes to help my devotee, I'm here to do that. So now Krishna assumes the role of a guru. So first friend, then servant, and now his guru. So Krishna assumes the role of the guru, and from the 11th verse we find the actual message of Gita. So the first chapter is observing the army, and the word observation, as I said before, is important because how you observe life is very crucial. Whether you observe it as a glass half empty or you observe it as a glass half filled will make all the difference. And therefore observation is crucial in our life. And now, then the second chapter, contents of the Gita summarized. Now, when the Gita, 18 chapters are there in Gita, what's the point of summarizing the entire Gita in the second chapter? It could be well that you've read the second chapter and you've understood Gita, right? What's the point of reading the rest of the Gita? And the point is this. By the end of first chapter, Arjuna was depressed. Okay? And Shastra, scriptures say that 4 types of people you cannot advise. You cannot teach 4 kinds of people. What are those 4 kinds of people? Number 1, when a husband and wife or 2 lovers are arguing or fighting, don't go in between them and advise them. It's not going to work. If you try to advise a husband, he will be angry at you. If you try to advise a wife, she'll be angry at you. So just leave them alone, they'll sort it out themselves. That's the first category of people you can't advise. The second category of people is when two scholars are debating. Don't go in between and take sides. You will not be able to achieve anything. So avoid that. The third category is don't attempt to advise a person who is depressed. In this situation, Arjuna was depressed, and Krishna knew that he is not in a mood to listen to heavy existential truths. He is not really ready to accept advice because he was depressed. Then the fourth category is you cannot advise a person who doesn't want to listen to your advice. So Krishna's task here, the first task was to get Arjuna out of his depression. Arjuna was depressed. He is not in a mood to listen or understand the Krishna's advice. So his task was to get Arjuna out of his depression. So he gives a complete summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita in a capsule form. Nothing elaborate, just a capsule. He touches upon the main topics and gives it to Arjuna. And Arjuna listens to it and he feels, yes, something makes sense to me. I think I want to hear more. And by the end of the second chapter, Arjuna has come out of his depression and he's ready to hear the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. So the second chapter is basically a summary. The purpose is to get Arjuna out of his depression. And Krishna achieves that. So he gives the entire capsule form of the entire Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna, it was successful in getting Arjuna out of the depression. Then we move on to the third chapter. The second chapter talks very briefly about Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga basically is analysis. You analyze anything, that's Sankhya. But when you analyze the matter and the soul, and the soul's connection to the super soul, that's Sankhya Yoga. So in the second chapter, basically there are a few sections. One section is the first 10 verses where Arjuna's confusion is there. The second section, Krishna describes the signs of the soul, Sankhya Yoga. Then the next section talks about karma or sakam karma, fruitive activities. And then the next section talks about nishkam karma, the non-fruitive activities or activities done for the pleasure of the Lord. And then the last section talks about the qualities of a sthita pragya, a person who's in equanimity, a person who is situated in the level of the soul. What are his qualities? So these are topics discussed in the second chapter, and that was able to help Arjuna come out of his depression. Moving on to the third chapter, which is titled Karma Yoga. Now, it is interesting to note why is Karma Yoga right in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. You see, when Krishna starts to speak his advices, Karma Yoga comes first. It is not by chance, and there is a reason for that. What is the reason? The reason is this. It's one has to understand this part. It can be a bit difficult to grasp. You see, the beginning of spiritual life begins with karma. In other words, one wants to understand God. One wants to know who is God or what is God. One wants to know one's relationship with God and so on. But how does that happen? You don't get that knowledge. This is spiritual knowledge. This is Divya Gyan. You don't get spiritual knowledge from books. You don't get spiritual knowledge from the library. Spiritual knowledge, or the knowledge about God, comes only when God decides to give you that knowledge. Very important, most important point to understand. It took me a while to get my head around this, but this is the most vital part of this video, or maybe the entire Bhagavad Gita. God is way above there. God is so high above there, and we are so low below here. There's no way that we can aim to know that God. Alright? It's like, the little ant which is crawling on the floor. That ant wants to know what is in your mind. The ants which is crawling on the floor, that ant wants to know what is in your mind, or what is your future plan. What can that ant do? Nothing. Because there is such a big difference between you and that ant. You are in completely different consciousness. It is just the same like we, the living entities, we are trying to know the God. We are lesser than ant also, and God is way up there. But there is a way that we will know the mind of God. There is a way. And what is that way? That's a secret. That way is when Lord Krishna decides to reveal himself, he will slowly reveal himself, only that much which you are eligible to receive. When Lord Krishna slowly reveals himself, little information which you are eligible, qualified to receive, you get knowledge about God. You don't get knowledge from the books. Don't be under that misunderstanding, misconception that I will read Vedas, I will read Upanishads. I come across people who say that proudly. I'm going to read all the Vedas, I'm going to read all the Upanishads, then I will know everything about God. I'm done. No. God will reveal him information about himself if he chooses to, when he chooses to whom he chooses to. You could be a PhD in the world, but in front of God, you're nothing. Or you could be the most, materially speaking, unqualified person. You will be illiterate. You can't write your name. You can't read or write. You don't have any material qualification, no degree, no PhD. But if Krishna is happy with you, he will reveal himself to you. You see, it depends on his grace. To whom he reveals, that person will know about the God. No, not from our own efforts, not by reading books. God reveals himself when he decides, to whom he decides to. And Krishna is giving us a secret. How does he reveal? It starts with karma. When you love somebody, you can tell that person, I love you. Yes. You can again tell, I love you. You will repeat saying that I love you like a parrot, and you will say it every day. You will say it morning, evening, night, and the other person will start getting irritated. Well, I heard it once. I know you love me. What is the point of saying it again and again? It's irritating. You see, action speaks louder than words. If you love somebody, show it in your action. Action speaks louder than words. Words are cheap. You can just say I love you to everybody, your dog, your cat, your neighbor, your postman, anybody. I mean, it's just words, lip service. Who wants that? Action speaks louder than words. If you love somebody, show it in your action. That's exactly what Krishna tells. Krishna reveals himself to those who love him. and those who love him will show it in their action. Therefore, karma yoga. So third chapter is karma yoga. So your spiritual journey, the first step in the spiritual journey is action for Krishna. You do some action for Krishna. Our founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, he would ask, you see, what he achieved, nobody has achieved in history. He left for America with 40 rupees in his pocket, and he came back with billions of rupees worth temples. He constructed temples in every country of the world. You see, ISKCON is there, covered the entire globe. There's hardly any country where there is not an ISKCON temple. And Prabhupada, at the ripe old age of 70, when people have put up their shoes and they have retired, that's when Srila Prabhupada went to establish ISKCON temples in every country in the world. And he went to New York, the most materialistic country, USA, the most materialistic place, New York, and in New York also the most difficult and downtrodden place. I think it's called Dovey Street or something like that. So Prabhupada went there, and his first set of disciples were all hippies. They had no idea about anything. Hinduism, Krishna consciousness, they had no clue. They were completely removed from all these. And so Prabhupada went to this park in New York, and with just 40 rupees in his pocket, this was in the 60s, and he went to the park and he started singing the kirtan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada just started singing the kirtan in a park in New York. And slowly the hippies, that area was full of hippies, then they started coming towards him. Hippies loved music. They started dancing to the Hare Krishna song, and they started joining him. And that was the first few sets of disciples that Prabhupada made. And Prabhupada would give them seva. Okay, you do this. Okay, he used to make prasadam, you know. The first temple or the center, ISKCON center was in a little shop in New York. And all these hippies would come, and they were completely engrossed in all the sense gratificatory activities. Drugs and smoking and sex and drinking and all those kinds of things. But they participated in singing the kirtan. They danced at the kirtan. You see, they dance for Krishna. Krishna notices every little thing that you do for him. When you come to the temple and you dance in the temple in front of the Krishna, in all the ISKCON temples we have this kirtan and we have dancing. Why do we do that? You are in the temple, you are in the front of Lord Krishna, you're dancing for him, you're dancing at his kirtan. That is seva. Krishna sees this person has come to my temple, this person is dancing for me, this person is singing for me, even clapping. Hare Krishna, we clap and we sing and we dance. The clapping is a seva. Krishna thinks, oh, he is clapping for me. That's a seva. You see, any little thing that you do for Krishna, that gets recorded for infinity in Krishna's book. So you are doing seva for Krishna. So all these hippies in New York, they were dancing and singing and they were clapping. Okay, that's a seva. The other thing that Prabhupada did was he used to make prasadam. Basically, it's food, vegetarian food that you cook and you offer it to Lord Krishna, and then you distribute it and you eat it. So Prabhupada used to make this prasadam, which would be simple, maybe dal, chawal or salad. And these hippies, basically they are disconnected from their families and they don't really have a home as such, not like our Indian families where, there's a close bonding and, things like that. They were anyway disconnected from their families. The families didn't approve of them, they didn't approve of their families, so they would flock to Prabhupada, and they would, so Prabhupada would tell them, can you cut the salad? So they would happily help Prabhupada because Prabhupada gave them that recognition and that